Right. This is like Intel in a way, because it's pieces we've covered fairly extensively, particularly in recent shows. And although it's titled Sub-Intel, in essence there's bits in it that are indicative of the larger side of what is really going on behind the scenes. Um, so I've got probably 7, 8 or 9 of these pieces, maybe even 10 or 12. So there's a reason for covering it, because it kind of exposes, and they're now being exposed in some cases, of stuff that's come out of the shows. And the first one is Bitcoin again. This will stagger a lot of people. I don't think many of us understand how it works too well. But Bitcoin itself consumes more energy than the entire nation of Switzerland to make fresh air tokens. Now, according to new estimates published by researchers at the University of Cambridge, an online tool was launched this week called the Cambridge Bitcoin Electricity Consumption Index, or CBECI, estimates how much energy is needed to maintain the Bitcoin network in real time. Now, before using this to calculate its annual energy usage, and currently the CBECI says the global Bitcoin network is consuming more than 7 gigawatts of electricity, and over the course of a year that equals 64 terawatts or tera hours of energy consumption. That's more than the country of Switzerland, who uses the whole of Switzerland uses over the same time period of 58 terawatts per year, so it's 6 watts more. And of course they're trying to increase this, and it's only 4 terawatts less than Colombia, which was the next one up. And it's yet again the staggering hypocrisy of the Ouroboros clowns. On one hand, we must save and conserve energy. On the other, we must use vast quantities of energy just to create fresh air tokens. You know, this is beyond madness. That 64 terawatts as it is currently, that waste of energy would be better served providing the 1.3 billion, yes, you heard that right, on our planet who still to this day do not have access to electricity. 1.3 billion. But no, let's throw 64 terawatt hours on fresh air tokens. It's all wrong, but at least they're being exposed. Also being exposed, although there's a kicker to this, is Congress is currently weighing up a bipartisan bill to crack down on the sharing of child porn on the Defense Department computers after a watchdog group found that the Pentagon's network ranked amongst the top US ISPs in sharing child porn content. Now, the notion that the Department of Defense network and Pentagon issued computers may be used to view, create or circulate such horrifying images is a shameful disgrace, and one we must fight head on, according to Abigail Spanberger, who's a Democrat out of Virginia. Accent deliberate. And she and co-sponsor Mark Meadows, who's Republican of North Carolina, introduced the End National Defense Network Abuse Act in the House. Now, Congress has known for at least a decade that child porn trading on Defense Department computers was a problem. Why now? And ICE identified 5,200 people subscribed to websites that were known to contain child pornography during a 2008 Project Flickr investigation, including hundreds of individuals affiliated with the Defense Department, some of whom even used their government email addresses and military post boxes to register on the offending websites. Now, worryingly, dozens possess some form of security clearance as well, while a handful of the offenders caught in Project Flickr received jail sentence, but thousands more, up to 80% of those identified in the ICE report, did not. And as combating child pornography was not one of the DCIS investigative priorities, said the Defense Department. Now, the US Defense Department's network ranked 19th out of 2,891 internet service providers for peer-to-peer trading of child porn in 2018. US Defense, 19th out of 2,900 nearly. And that's according to the National Criminal Justice Training Centre, suggesting the problem has only gotten worse in the 10 years since Project Flickr wrapped up. One has to ask, why this now? When it was clear there was a major problem under the Obama administration, why wasn't nothing done? And one has to ask the question, is it a case it has only become a problem now as the Pentagon has in part gone against the old system and worked with the man of World Holding Trust? 19th highest out of 2,900 trading child porn, the US Defense Department. One of the world's leading smartphone makers, which we have covered, Huawei, which just sounds like the Native American tribe, who the fuck are we, turns away from Google's Android operating system, and if it happens, the US tech giant risks losing a huge number of users. Now, the Huawei CEO has warned Huawei will always be on the same line of interest, and if we don't load Google's system, Google will lose 700 to 800 million users in the future, which may not be a bad thing, but then what are you replacing it with? Now, the Chinese telecommunications major was blacklisted last month by the Trump administration after Washington accused the company of spying for Beijing. Not the case, it's actually the Dragons. Now, Google, whose Android OS is used in many of Huawei's phones, was among the American tech companies prohibited from dealing with Huawei, and the Silicon Valley firm is allowed to send software updates to Huawei products until August the 19th this year. But when the ban fully comes into force, the Chinese phone maker is set to lose access to some Google apps and will only have access to the open source version of the Android OS. See how it all ties in? The open source, Robert David Steele. And he's like David Hogg, he goes missing as well. Now, Huawei said earlier that it's working on its own mobile operating system called Hongmeng and has already filed a trademark. And in his interview, the CEO stressed Hongmeng will allow the company to protect its growth if it's forced to replace Android, which he says Huawei does not want to do. There's a lot of game playing going on with security and internet services big time. Here's another one. Another one that's been exposed. Remember me talking about mergers last week? Chip maker Broadcom Inc. is in advanced talks to buy the cybersecurity firm Symantec Corp. Oops. They were featured heavily in Clowns in Panic, were they not? Now, this is according to sources familiar with the matter, as Broadcom seeks to diversify beyond semiconductors. You see what happens, and this is where they're using us to drive it in some ways, but it's still weakening. You have to remember that. So now Symantec is starting to get exposed, a bit like Monsanto. Merger or sell it under a new name is becoming a common theme, where they hide the company. Facebook, YouTube tweaking algorithms to fight misinformation. According to Wall Street Journal reporter Bob McMillan, reports that Facebook and YouTube are being flooded with potentially harmful information about cancer treatments. That's their fact-checker division again. Of course, this week, Facebook, Twitter and the WhatsApp have been going down on and off globally and not functioning properly. All I will say is, oh my. Trump did a number of tweets this week, which has probably made his latest speech more disappointing. Just when you think there's some elements of winds of change, the door closes again. So much for the QB ready. And the July 4th announcements, etc., etc., etc. You know, it sounded all very Drake to me. But Trump made a couple of Twitter comments this week, which needs to be taken note of. And the first one is Texas will defend them and indemnify them against political harassment. Talking about people moving from New York to Texas. And he's citing that New York State and Governor Cuomo. So many people are leaving New York for Texas and Florida that it is totally under siege. First, New York taxes you too high, then they sue you just to complete the job. And people are fleeing New York like never before. If they own a business, they are twice as likely to flee. And if they are a victim of harassment by the Attorney General of that state, like what they are doing to our great NRA, which I think will move to Texas quickly, where they are loved. I presume NRA is the National Rifle Association. It may be something different. And then he went on, New York businesses in search of anything at all they can find to make me look as bad as possible. So on top of ridiculously high taxes, my children and companies are spending a fortune on lawyers. No wonder people and businesses are fleeing New York in record numbers. Maybe, big maybe, Trump is finally getting round to recognise where many of this country's issues arise from. Just maybe. You know, New York and its business way of operating is and has killed this country. So I'm pleased that Trump is now seeing it. Maybe we need to see more actions rather than tweets, in my opinion. He also threw out a spanner in the works, which most outside of THI will not get. With this tweet, he said, China and Europe playing big currency manipulation game and pumping money into their system in order to compete with the USA. We should match or continue being the dummies who sit back and politely watch as other countries continue to play their games as they have for many years. Interesting comment that, in and of itself. What he's referring to is the black and blue dragon games. That's what he's referring to, not the countries or the regions. That's what all the trade deals are about. They're all with the dragon groups, not the countries per se. Now, banks continue to play games and now deciding themselves, despite no clearance accounts anymore, to deliberately hold back checks and paychecks. You know, something has to give with the bank shortly, particularly when China crashes, and it will. But I've received several reports now from just our own members alone, so this is a much wider problem that the media will not cover. Don't be wasting your time trying to get verification off them clients. But the one thing I've noticed is when people write in and say this bank did this, a lot of people are still banking with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase and Citibank, and wonder why they're having problems. You know, I've warned of these banks for many years now, and yet people are still banking with them. Why? Convenient? Well, you know how convenience works for us, or not, as the case may be. Not going to say it again. Here's another one in trouble. Deutsche Bank has now plans to tell hundreds of US equities and rates traders that they will no longer be employed there. Oops. Now, the chief executive may present a major restructuring plan as early as next week and slashing as many as 20,000 positions worldwide. Now, last week, this is so they're slashing all these jobs and major restructuring, and they're in negative liquidity by at least 400%, probably more now. Is last week the Federal Reserve did its annual stress test on the bank and passed it. It's bankrupt, it's kaput, gone. That's why they're getting rid of 20,000 staff. Including many deep job cuts in the US, I might add. Particularly in New York. That'll be another one that leaves. We're back to crypto again. They're all chiming in. This time Stephen Moore, who was a nomination to join the Federal Reserve Board, but was rescinded by Mr. Trump, and he says he has the answer to fixing volatility in the crypto market. And he has now joined the crypto venture that's building what it calls, quote, the world's decentralized central bank, unquote. And he stated the goal of the bank is to balance the volatility in the crypto markets by controlling the supply of cryptocurrencies, similar to how, quote, the Fed oversees the supply of money in the US. I told you, it's new boss, same as new one, same as the old boss. Same program. Only with cash, you have a lifeline. With fresh air, you don't. And he said the bank will be called Decentral. We'll have more on Decentral later. And will trade its own tokens for other cryptocurrencies, but Decentral's tokens are expected to be controlled by an algorithm, which don't work, and tied to the value of the US dollar or determined by a stable valuation method. Well, they've already stated they've got no assets to support it, so there is no stable valuation method. And he said the company hopes to stabilise cryptocurrencies by regulating their supply in the same way the Fed monitors the supply of money in the US. In other words, they're going to collect it all and then hand none out. Or print out more fresh air and devalue everything. You see, that's how it works. More banks issues. Bank of America spoke this week about embracing digital payment transactions while moving forward towards a cashless society, and stated, "We want a cashless society." Are you getting the message now of who's driving the cashless society and why? And of course, they can't open their mouths now without spilling out their hidden agenda, and stated, "We have more to gain than anybody from a pure operating costs perspective." That confirms what I put in Clowns in Panic show. They're cutting their overheads by cutting the millionaires out, and only the billionaires are going to play. And he stated some countries have already braced the cashless route. In a survey conducted in 2018, 13% of Swedes reported using cash for transactions, and the country's retailer predicted by 2025 they would stop accepting cash for transactions. Yet again, they're telling you. That's why they said when Libra is going to be 5 years ahead. So by 2025, they're talking about eliminating cash and going into fresh air tokens. And some of the Swedes have even gotten a microchip inserted into their hands as a quick and convenient way of paying. There's that word again, convenient. Convenience leads to slavery and tyranny for us. It's not convenient. Two more short pieces. I warned recently of avoiding mountains. Events of this week, and particularly today, reinforces that. Can we say expansion is underway? Some of the earthquakes felt today were kind of shallow in depth, were they not? Including one in the aptly named town in Utah called Independence. We'll be back shortly.